On this day, 9th of February, 1822, the Republic of Haiti attacks and invades the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic was only a few months old at this time, and this period, a few months, is referred to as its ephemeral independence. It would not restore its independence for 22 years, and the occupation by Haitians would create a bitterness that lasts to this day. The French colony of Santo Domingo, modern-day Haiti, had been one of the wealthiest colonies in the world. It produced huge amounts of sugar, indigo, and various other exotic spices on massive plantations owned by wealthy Frenchmen. Slavery in Haiti was quite brutal, even compared to other places. So much so that there wasn't really a self-replicating base of slaves in Haiti. So they were constantly having to import more and more African slaves. And so, when the French Revolution came about, many of the slaves working in the fields were first-generation African. They'd just come over on the boat probably a few years, maybe 10 years, maybe a few months before. And then the French revolutionaries abolished slavery. This caused chaos in the colonies, especially in the largest and wealthiest, Santo Domingo. This would lead eventually to the extermination of the white plantation owners and the taking over of Haiti by the mulatto class, the mixed race people. So they would have been the results of slave and white owner. And they took over, and it was quite a violent revolution. This revolution continued, and many of the mulattoes ended up being exterminated by the pure black African slaves who then took over. There were various empires, kingdoms, republics were declared. None of them were recognized by anyone else. The French didn't recognize them for a good few decades. However, they had what they thought was a danger to the east, and it was the Spanish territory of Santo Domingo. This needed to be dealt with, they thought, and so in 1822, after years of discontent and chaos and division, the Haitians were going to unite the island of Hispaniola. The French Revolutionary period was a bit chaotic for the island of Hispaniola. At one point, we had rebels in Santo Domingo, and we had the Spanish attempting to invade from their colony of Santo Domingo. They were pushed back, but the French then occupied the entire island, and even after Haitian independence in 1804, the French kept Santo Domingo, which was then taken from them in 1809 by the British, who then gave it back to the Spanish, and it was a bit all over the place. In 1822, both republics were now independent, and the government in Haiti was led by a guy called Jean-Pierre Boyer. And like his predecessor, Toussaint Louverture, who was a general during the Haitian Revolution, he had also abolished slavery. And in order to raise the funds for indemnity that he had to pay to the French in order for the French to recognize Haiti. It took them 2 decades to do that. They were going to have to pay 60 million francs, and so he needed taxes to pay for that. So one of the things that he did, or one of the reasons for the invasion of Santo Domingo, was to turn the screw on the people in that country and pay off the debt they needed to pay off. Now, when they did invade, they were quite revolutionary. They cut off, for example, the Roman Catholic Church from the Vatican, so they had to be appointed locally, and I'm assuming by the government. Education collapsed. The university was shut down because it was seen as a source of subversion. Occupation troops weren't paid very well, and so they did what occupation troops do when they're not paid very well anywhere in the world. They take what they can by force from peasants and people living in the city, from shops and merchants, plundering the local people. Those people also had to pay taxes, a lot of tax, to the government, and they also banned white landowners. So considering that Dominican Republic was a place that was a third white, then a third mixed, and a third others, some former slaves and others were mixed with native and various others, that was quite a lot of people that were now excluded from owning anything, and they had their lands taken. So many of the most successful people in Santo Domingo left for Colombia, Cuba, or elsewhere in the New World. In the mountains, many people were able to get away with not following the laws or paying taxes. It was much more difficult for the Haitian government to go into the mountains and force the peasants there to pay what they should have paid. But in the city of Santo Domingo itself, it was here where the occupation was most brutal, and it was here where a movement for independence originated. And so it would be from here where Haiti would face the consequences of its invasion. So from 1822 onwards up till 1844, the Haitians ruled what is now the Dominican Republic. And they weren't very good rulers. They seemed to annoy everyone that they shouldn't have annoyed, and they took more than the people could give. Eventually, in 1838, a group came together, a secret society called La Trinitaria, so I suppose the Three, founded by Juan Pablo Duarte, who would later become a leader of the Dominican Republic. They sought complete independence of Santo Domingo, and they didn't want to be under any foreign control. The war went against Haiti. The Haitians were, initially back in the day, they were better fighters, but at this point, Dominicans were able to beat them handily. They pushed them out of the Dominican Republic. Although their independence didn't last that long. 17 years later, when the Americans were having their civil war, the Spanish came back. Only for a few years. They gave up pretty quick. But eventually, the Dominican Republic became completely independent. But for its first century, that was not guaranteed. First, there was the Haitians. Well, the French first, then the Haitians, and then the Spanish, and then later on, even the Americans. So it wasn't guaranteed that this plot of land would ever become an independent country. But eventually, it did. Okay, so on this day, the 9th of February, 1822, Haiti invades Santo Domingo and then occupies it for 22 years. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment.